Serious, what was the dirtiest trick ever pulled in the history of war? The US firebombed Tokyo. Because the houses were mostly made of wood, they knew the city would burn. Even the guy who drafted the plan, Robert McNamara, was ashamed of it. During the Siege of Kaffa, the Mongols hurled the corpses of the deceased soldiers decimated by the Black Plague into the besieged city. It is considered one of the key events that helped spreading the disease in Western Europe, killing millions. The Russians and their use of a scorched earth policy. I can't think of a better way to flip off your invaders than ruining all your own so when they do take it, it's worthless. Not only that, but the land itself is just too damn cold. So go ahead. Take the land. You will just freeze to death. Congratulations. Dirtiest trick that was conceived but not used was British scientists formulating a plan of dropping anthrax-laced linseed cakes into cattle fields as a bio-nuke of sorts once it worked up the food chain. After initial experiments destroyed pretty much all life on the island they used, they decided that possibly killing off everything in continental Europe probably wasn't a good idea. In World War I, the Allies became used to the smell of chemical weapons and would put their gas masks on quickly. The Germans changed their tactics and would use nearly odorless vomit-inducing chemicals that would absorb quickly into the lungs first. Then, once soldiers were vomiting and couldn't keep their gas masks on, they would fire the main artillery barrage containing the lethal chemicals. So there's this kind of honey made in Turkey called mad honey. It's made from the pollen of rhododendron flowers. If you eat very much of it you get very intoxicated, and you often hallucinate. You can even OD on it. A few times in antiquity, it was used as a weapon of war. For example, the Persians left some out for the Romans to find. The Romans are that sweet it right up. And then the Persians attacked them while they were all tripping balls and defenseless. In the trenches of France of World War I, General Monash was given with the unenviable task of punching through the German line to claim the French town of Le Hamel. The way that Monash went about doing this was both revolutionary and bloody sneaky. The German forces were well equipped and well fortified, reinforced with heavy artillery and machine guns, and the troops were very well trained. Faced by these odds, Monash began to condition the German forces. Every day at dawn, he would let loose a barrage of smoke bombs followed by mustard gas canisters. The Germans, following their training, would equip themselves with gas masks which protected them. Monash kept up this bombardment for 2 weeks, and soon the Germans became accustomed to the pattern of attack, and would immediately don their gas masks and hunker down at the first sign of smoke. But on the dawn of the 4th of July, the smoke bombs were not followed by gas, but by the Australians. The German gas masks protected them from mustard gas and smoke, but they also vastly impeded their vision, hearing, and ability to communicate. With the noise of the battle, and the obscuring smoke, they were deaf and blind on the battlefield. And to make things worse, this was not an unprotected infantry massed attack, but a creeping barrage supported by a division of tanks, heavy artillery, and aircraft. The tanks protected the vulnerable infantry, and the artillery and aircraft prevented the Germans from effectively deploying anti-tank measures. The battle was over in just 90 minutes, and marked the rise of mixed arms warfare. I think the start of World War II when Hitler made prisoners dress like Polish soldiers and let them attack Germany so that Germany could run over Poland. Sneaky bastard. According to some records in the art of war, it is considered a good strategy to corner your men and have the enemy attempt to wipe them out, because when the only means of escape survival is through the enemy, then your own men will fight to the death. Not sure if this counts as a trick, but Napoleon, prior to the Battle of Marengo, not only did he cross the Alps with his entire army, a completely unexpected move, but once across, the Austrians thought Napoleon would move to Genoa in order to relieve the siege of that city. Thousands were dying of starvation, and French General Massena desperately called for Napoleon's aid. Napoleon, a ruthless and surprising move, ignored the calls for help and instead moved to attack the main portion of the Austrian army, eventually winning the Battle of Marengo. Massena surrendered Genoa, and it would be years before he eventually forgave Napoleon for abandoning him, and it would be years before Napoleon forgave Massena for surrendering. Not so dirty, but Turks had the Turan tactic. The army would form it into a crescent, with the arms of the crescent being the armored, strong divisions and middle front being the fastest divisions and middle back being the highest firepower cannons. They'd start the battle lined up and charge. Then the fast middle front guys would start retreating to the lines behind the middle back, the cannons. The arms of the crescent would hold firm because they were the armored part. The enemy would think they were retreating completely because it looks like they are losing their it and also their formation, and will chase after them only to be met with the cannons and to be encircled by the crescent's arms. It was a slaughter of the enemy after that. The Battle of Mayanoon in the Iraqi-Iranian War. You wait until nighttime, and you will see how we are killing these Iranian dogs. An Iraqi officer said with a broad grin, "We are frying them like eggplants." He then took us on a tour of dozens of thick electrical cables his troops had lain through the marshy battlefield. A spaghetti network that snaked in and out of the patchwork of lagoons. He showed us the mammoth electric generators that fed the exposed power lines from positions just behind the Iraqi front lines. And when the Iranian Revolutionary Guards made their regular evening advance, the officer and his men demonstrated the macabre genius of their invention. Iraqi gun batteries fired just enough artillery to force the Revolutionary Guards from their marsh boats, and when hundreds of them had been forced to continue their advance through the lagoons on foot, the men manning the Iraqi generators flipped a few switches and sent thousands of volts of electricity surging through the marshland. Within seconds, hundreds of Iranians were electrocuted. This occurred nightly. Not so much the dirtiest trick as one of the most hard-nosed decisions. The first V1 flying bombs, if you're under the age of 40, think first generation cruise missiles, were being launched by Germany against London, and they were hitting. They were area weapons, as accuracy was pretty much a mile on any side of the aiming point, but they were coming down in central London. Germany had no agents in Britain, not one. They thought they did, but every agent they sent over was caught and then either turned or executed, and the other agents were all fictitious, imaginary ones dreamed up in a British campaign of disinformation that was, and is, breathtaking. The government decided that they simply didn't want to risk the buildings and architecture and heritage of the heart of London. Quite a lot had been bombed out anyway, and so the agents reported back to Berlin that the V1s were overshooting their targets and coming down in North London. Fake stories planted in newspapers reinforced the deception. The Germans dutifully shortened the range, and the V1s knocked it out of areas of South London. One reason why a lot of Croydon is 1960s concrete is because of the damage done by the V1s in 1944. In short, someone said, "Our people are going to die and our buildings are going to be flat and whatever happens, so let it be here." Lot of these will be depressing ones. As dirty or sneaky tricks go, Operation Mincemeat was crafty, or at least I'm looking for an excuse to post it. More than one April morning in 1943, a sardine fisherman spotted the corpse of a British soldier floating in the sea off the coast of Spain, setting in train a course of events that would change the course of World War II. More than Operation Mincemeat was the most successful wartime deception ever attempted, and certainly the strangest. It hoodwinked Nazi espionage chiefs, sent German troops racing in the wrong direction, and saved thousands of lives by deploying a secret agent who was different, in one crucial respect, from any spy before or since. He was dead. His mission? To convince the Germans that instead of attacking Sicily, the Allied armies would invade Greece. More than the brainchild of an eccentric RAF officer and a brilliant Jewish barrister, this great deception involved an extraordinary cast of characters including Ian Fleming, who would go on to write the James Bond stories, a famous forensic pathologist, a beautiful Secret Service secretary, a submarine captain, 3 novelists, an irascible admiral who loved fly fishing, and a dead Welsh tramp. Using fraud, imagination and seduction, Winston Churchill's team of spies spun a web of deceit so elaborate and so convincing that they began to believe it themselves. From a windowless basement beneath Whitehall, the hoax travelled from London to Scotland to Spain to Germany and ended up on Hitler's desk. During the Second World War, German forces would rig crooked wall paintings to explode when straightened with hopes that it would kill Allied officers when they came in to set up command posts. Washington crossing the Delaware, sneaked into the Hessian camp while they were drunk and celebrating Christmas. 3 American losses versus 22 losses on the Hessian side and 1,000 prisoners. Capture of their weapons, gunpowder, and supplies. Edit. Deleted repeated text. Crac des Chevaliers was a crusader castle in Syria and one of the most important castles in the world with imposing walls and very good defense at all. The castle was besieged by Sultan Baybars. This man conveyed a forged letter to the garrison, supposedly from the Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller in Tripoli, which granted permission for them to surrender. They did. Baber got the castle. Left square bracket. Edit. Corrected imposant. THX to HFJWJCBJFKSJCJ. Genghis Khan, in a large-scale attack against the fortress at Volohay, after being unable to breach the walls, demanded 1,000 cats and 10,000 Chinese swallows in exchange for lifting the siege. When the defenders sent out the animals, Genghis took them and tied tufts of cotton to their tails and ignited them, at which point the animals rushed back to their homes within the city, igniting hundreds of small fires, while Genghis' army attacked again and took the fortress amidst the panic. There was a time of World War I called live and let live, both sides essentially refusing to fight and coming out of the trenches together, socializing. After the generals on one side, I think it was the British, but could be wrong, found out about this, they devised a dirty trick. The British lured the Germans out of their trench by playing a traditional German anthem and cut them all down, thus ending the days of Live and Let Live from Radiolab program about morality, a truly mind-blowing episode. The actor George Sanders found out that his friend, David Niven, was very chummy with Winston Churchill during the war. He asked Niv to give the Prime Minister a note detailing his idea for a new bomb that the RAF could drop on German cities. It would be exactly the same as all the old bombs, except it would have a wind-activated siren attached to it. So when the bombs dropped, the German civilian population hiding in shelters would hear the siren, think that the all clear was being sounded and come out. Just as the bombs hit, Niven didn't say how Churchill took the idea. Counter-terrorism and anti-crime units have been seeding black market arms dealers with C4 explosive-laced ammo. When fired, the bullets tend to have a small exploding effect on the weapons, rendering the weapon useless, and typically giving the user non-lethal but disfiguring hand and facial injuries. This bad ammo looks and feels like every other bullet that the dealer has sold, so the only solution is to stop using that arms dealer. Now you can't trust your existing arms dealer, and you have to find a new one that may or may not have tainted ammo, or even be a Fed. In essence, it shuts down an entire illegal arms industry at the cost of about 1 or 2 crates of C4 bullets mixed in with the others. The Red Wedding actually happened. Hannibal's snake-filled pots, which were loaded onto catapults. When Timur the Lame was about to attack the city of Shivas, he promised the 3,000 Christian Armenian Sipahis that he would not shed any of their blood if they surrendered. They did, and, true to his word, he had them all buried alive. Olga of Kiev's entire campaign against the Drevlians. She had the first set of emissaries buried alive, had a second set locked in a bathhouse and then burned. Then she invited a whole bunch more for a funeral feast and had them slaughtered while they were drunk. Then she just marched her soldiers over and took out the rest. Back in the English Civil War, there was a certain nobility in battle where you were supposed to be able to see your opponents and you would stand and fight. Cromwell decided this was stupid and in numerous battles would send troops round the side hidden by trees and bushes to tear through the cavaliers before the fight properly began. Was a lot dirtier a trick at the time. I read somewhere about a high-ranking officer in the Chinese military that was infamous among enemies and allies for his cleverness and ability to come up with unique war tactics. During some war, the enemy army was marching towards some strategically valuable location. The general, knowing he could not let his army take the location, rode to a town that the army had to pass through to get there, and sets up his plan. As the enemy army approaches the town, they see this general, all alone, sitting on an arch above the entrance playing a flute. They turned right the duck around and abandoned the plan, fearing some brutal and elaborate ambush. The general was bluffing. He was the only person there. Edit. Please look at the comment below by Yujangwei23 for some further specifics by someone who clearly knows way more about this than I do. Good work. Not sure if it's been posted yet or not, but the Ghost Army was a pretty great trick. Maybe not dirty but still really clever and underhanded. More than the 1,100 man unit was given a unique mission within the Allied army to impersonate other Allied army units to deceive the enemy. From a few weeks after D-Day, when they landed in France, until the end of the war, they put on a traveling roadshow utilizing inflatable tanks, sound trucks, fake radio transmissions, scripts and pretense. They staged more than 20 battlefield deceptions, often operating very close to the front lines. Their story was kept secret for more than 40 years after the war, and elements of it remain classified. I think that's so ducking cool. You had entire airfields full of fake planes and Germany was running around going crazy over it. But it was all fake. So perfect. Plus the insignia is really badass. Letting the Germans bomb Coventry, so that the Germans wouldn't suspect that their codes were cracked and the British knew they were going to bomb Coventry. Scipio Africanus was fighting against the Carthaginians. One battle in particular, both sides lined up in battle formation for consecutive days. Each side was also using Iberian mercenaries on their flanks, with their native troops in the center. Several days passed with no actual fighting. Eventually Scipio Africanus ordered that his Roman legionaries line up on the flanks rather than the Iberian mercenaries. As expected, the Carthaginians lined up the original way and Scipio ordered his troops to attack. The Roman legionaries, being better equipped and better trained, crushed the Iberians fighting for the Carthaginians and rolled up their flanks. This ended up being a decisive victory for the Romans. Edit. This was the Battle of Ilipa in case you were wondering. Before the Battle of Yorktown, US Civil War, Confederate General Magruder was able to convince McClellan that he had 40,000 troops manning his defenses, rather than his actual force of 10,000. He found a point in the defenses where he knew his troops would be observed and counted, and marched them past that point several times. McClellan had 120k troops and superior artillery, but like always, hesitated to attack even with superior numbers. He also thought that another general was approaching with 60,000 men, close to the actual number, and didn't want to attack Magruder's 40k and be hit by the 60k as well. So he waited for his own reinforcements and more reconnaissance. If he had attacked Magruder, he would have overwhelmed him and been able to prepare for Johnston's arrival. Instead, he waited to attack until Magruder's forces were reinforced. Johnston arrived and added even more troops, and the Confederates were eventually able to slip away from the battle with only 300 casualties. TLDR, Magruder marched troops in a circle past his enemies, making 10,000 men look like 40,000, causing the cautious McClellan to hesitate and waste the opportunity.